For our next learning objective, we're going to prepare a performance report that combines activity variances and revenue and spending variances. Recall when we first compared Larry's actual results with his planning budget, we observed some fairly large variances. Our revenue variance, for instance, was $5,500, and we identified two potential causes for this. One is fairly obvious. It was due to a higher level of activity. We cut 50 more lawns than we had expected, and we identified that as an activity variance. But we also said our variance could be caused by charging a higher or lower price than we had anticipated. Again, we expected to charge $75 per lawn. Did we charge more than this, or did we charge less than this? By combining Larry's original planning budget with its actual results and using a flexible budget, we can answer this question. The typical format of our performance report inserts the flexible budget column between our planning budget and our actual results, and then we calculate our activity variances and our revenue and spending variances on the same report. Recall, we had a total favorable spending or revenue variance of $5,500. Let's see how that's broken down between our activity and our revenue variance. The $3,750 activity variance is simply the 50 additional lawns multiplied by $75 per lawn. Our revenue variance is simply the difference between our actual revenues of $43,000 and our flexible budget amount of $41,250. And it's a favorable variance because our actual results are higher than our flexible budget amounts. If we calculate an average price charged per lawn by taking our $43,000 in actual revenues and dividing it by 550 lawns, we get an average price of $78.18, which is higher than our planned revenues per lawn of $75, which is why we ended up with a favorable revenue variance. Let's go ahead now and look at our expenses. In particular, let's go ahead and look at gasolines and supply expense. Originally, we had planned to spend $4,500 on gasoline and supplies. Our actual results came in at $5,100, a $600 unfavorable variance. Let's now go ahead and look at what were the two components of that $600 unfavorable variance. $450 of that unfavorable variance was due to an activity level, and that's the 50 extra lawns multiplied by $9 per lawn. The remaining $150 is the difference between our actual results and our flexible budget. And notice, if we take our $5,100 in actual expenditures for gasoline and supplies and divide it by 550 lawns, we get an average cost per lawn of $9.27, which is higher than our original planned expenditure of $9 per lawn. And this is what is driving our unfavorable spending variance. We can do a similar analysis for the other expense items on our budget report. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example. Vulcan Flyovers offers scenic overflights of Mount St. Helens, the volcano in Washington state that explosively erupted in 1982. Data concerning the company operations in July appear below. The company measures its activity in terms of flights. Customers can buy individual tickets for overflights or hire an entire plane for an overflight at a discount. Prepare a flexible budget performance report for July. We're given down below our planning budget, which was based on 50 expected flights, and our actual results, which was based on 48 flights, and our flexible budget, which was based on our actual level of activity of 48 flights. Let's go ahead and look at and prepare our activity variances and our revenue spending variances and interpret them. From an activity perspective, we had 2 fewer flights than we had originally expected, which would be an unfavorable variance. From a revenue perspective, our activity variance is $640. And again, this will be unfavorable because we flew fewer flights than we had originally planned or anticipated. In terms of our expense variances, all of our activity variances for our expenses will be favorable since our activity level was below our original plan. Wages and salaries, our variance is 164, and again it is favorable since our flexible budget expense is less than our original plan. For fuel, our variance is $46. Again, that's the difference simply between our planning budget and our flexible budget, and again, a favorable variance since our flexible budget's less. Airport fees, we've got a $76 favorable variance. Aircraft depreciation, we've got a $14 favorable variance. And for office expenses, we've got a $4 favorable variance. Our total expense variance is $304, and again, it's favorable. Since we had a $640 unfavorable revenue variance and a $304 favorable expense variance, the difference between these is $336. So our net operating variance will be unfavorable, but only by $336. The unfavorable revenue variance was partially offset by favorable expense variances. For our revenue variance, we again compare the difference between our actual revenues of $13,650 and our flexible budget revenues of $15,360. And since our actual revenues are less than our flexible budget, again we would say it was an unfavorable variance. In terms of wages and salaries, our actual wages and salaries are $494 more than our flexible budget amount, so that's an unfavorable variance. For fuel cost, our actual fuel costs were $156 higher than our flexible budget amount, which again is an unfavorable variance. Our airport fees were $124 less than our flexible budget, so this would be a favorable variance. For aircraft depreciation, there was no variance. For office expenses, our actual office expenses were $174 higher than our flexible budget amounts, so again, this is an unfavorable variance. In total, our expenses were $700 higher than our flexible budget amount, so that's an unfavorable variance. We had an unfavorable revenue variance of $1,710, an unfavorable expense variance of $700. These two unfavorable variances combined equal $2,410, and our overall variance for net operating income is unfavorable.